Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martina James. I'm with APA Virginia. We're going to give it just a minute to get things rolling, and then we will get started and get the session going. Thank you. All right, good afternoon and welcome to Your Hour with APA Virginia, presented by the Berkeley Group. First and foremost, thank you to the Berkeley Group for making this webinar series possible. We really appreciate your support and the support of APA Virginia chapter. This webinar series is every fourth Monday of the month from noon to 1 o'clock. All of our upcoming webinars are listed on our website, and those that are eligible at this point for CM credits have the CM credit code listed with the registration link. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Also, if anyone has any suggestions or topics that they would like presented on this webinar series, please do not hesitate to reach out with any suggestions, speakers, topics of the like. As always, our webinars are recorded. After the webinar ends, it will then be posted to our YouTube page, where all of our previous webinars are posted and are available for CM credits as well. So feel free to share those with colleagues, or maybe somebody who missed it, or if you don't get to finish the whole webinar, that's a great opportunity as well. Also on our website, you'll notice under the webinars, there is a call to join us for our legislative committee calls. Right now, the General Assembly is in session, and we are doing our best to keep APA Virginia membership updated on what is going on with legislation regarding planning and there's some different affordable housing issues going on at the moment. Feel free to join us for those calls every Friday. If you click this Join Us button, you can be added to the list to get the call-in information, and that will be shared each Friday. Our upcoming conference is this summer, APA 2020, and it is in Richmond, Virginia, in July 19th through 22nd. So you can find all that information at apavirginia.com. There are still sponsorship opportunities available, and currently we are going through the submissions for session proposals. So if you have any questions, please again reach out to us, info@apavirginia.com. With that, we'll go ahead and get started with this week's webinar, Community Conversations for Collaboration, Bridge Street Area Revitalization. The 2018 Bridge Street Area Plan focuses on revitalization of the Town of Bedford Centertown core. Human-centered design exercises facilitated conversations to bridge divides across the community, both physically and relationally. Using an EPA Brownfields grant, the project was directed by a citizen steering committee whose idea was to start the conversations. The outcome is a plan of implementation that seeks to build the community from the inside out to provide economic opportunity and quality of life for the downtown area and beyond. Mary Zirkle and Josephine Arbaugh are going to be our presenters, and I just have one housekeeping item before I hand it off to Josephine and Mary. If you all have questions throughout the presentation, I ask that you type those in the questions box in your control panel. At the end of the presentation, we will take all those questions and get them answered for you. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Josephine, and then we will get started.
All right, I am ready. Let's see.
All right.
Set up the presentation mode.
There you go.
All right, so I guess Mary's going to kick it off for us.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Mary Zirkle. I'm the Economic Development Coordinator for the Town of Bedford. So it's really exciting to be doing one of these as an economic developer now when, I didn't do these when I was a community developer. My job here with the Town of Bedford is that I get to do both. So our strategy for economic development here is that a good community is going to build a good economy. So we work towards that every day. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the Bridge Street area plan. It was also known as the school-to-school plan, and I'll tell you why. And first, I also want to introduce the project team that was involved in this. You're going to hear mostly from Josephine Arbaugh today of Hill Studio. She's an architect and a planner, so she's really cool to have two hats on at any one time thinking about a project holistically. So part of the team from Hill Studio was her boss, David Hill, and then we had a plethora of other people from Hill Studio that joined in, bringing in their expertise from landscape architecture and GIS. So that's where these maps are coming from. We also had on the team, the lead was Cardno, our engineer for our EPA Brownfields grant. So I can't stress enough how important that aspect of this was, because the EPA Brownfields grant actually funded the project. So that was critical and key to having that. And then also on our team was a market assessment firm, Arnett Muldrow. They're really good at pulling together lots of different things and helping them make sense for a community. So just to give you an overview of the team, this was not all done in a box, but the biggest part of this team was a stakeholder group whose idea it was to do this in the first place. So we had a redevelopment opportunity at our former middle school, the north end of Longwood Avenue. You see that, the red dot on the north side, and I'll give you a little overview at the end of how we may have a different opportunity coming as we've had a great loss in the community of one of the buildings that was part of that redevelopment strategy. So it goes from the former middle school and public school, which 1912 and 1928 buildings, on down to the south for our Bedford Science and Technology Center, which was the historic African-American school in the county, Susie G. Gibson. And we thought it was very important, the stakeholder that group that led this really emphasized the need to make it clear that there were two high schools in the town. So we wanted to connect those two and educate the public. So we tried to do as much as we could on the south end of town. So the planning process, everyone as a planner is pretty familiar with how you step through something like this. But the big part of the Bridge Street plan, again, it was grassroots, stakeholder-led. The town was brought in after they'd actually had a meeting with that. And so it was really imperative to make sure we continued on with that conversation. And so we had your series of committee kickoff meetings. Again, that actually started before the town was brought on. The steering committee was critical to this, and each one of them were assigned different facets of this that we'll get into here in a minute. We held a community meeting, as any good planner would, but this one was really amazing because about 100 people came out to this, and it was something that, again, everyone in the group was responsible for being a part of. And then the outcomes of the community meeting were taken back to the community in a series of pop-up open houses, and then ultimately a survey that helped us refine what was going to be an outcome that we would then implement. So from here, Josephine's going to tell you about how the integration worked with our stakeholder group.
Sure. Thanks, Mary, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So from the onset of the project, we knew that the planning process needed to be very engaging and transparent. We knew there was a feel or a sense of divide on the south side from the north side of the corridor. And we also knew that we needed to take advantage of the human capital resources in the community, as well as the huge momentum that had been built from previous conversations among residents and businesses, because this was a grassroots effort, like Mary mentioned. So what we adopted was a steering committee structure for the project team that involved a lot of members of the community that had initially been part of the conversations. And so what we did at our first meeting together was identifying what were some of the overarching goals for this group that had started at the grassroots level. And we identified 5 themes initially that were important for the community: historic and architectural resources, arts and culture, business development or economic development, housing and community, public spaces, as well as education. So what our goal was to use this human capital resource and these dedicated and very committed community members to understand the community better, the community needs, the context, and also to make them part of the process in our goal setting, in our public outreach efforts, in allowing them to become advocates and champions for this effort to build support later as well. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a tool that we use called a stakeholder map, and basically helped us identify who were going to be the leaders within each of those themes and what were going to be their roles. Their first role was obviously to identify all their members of the community, all their stakeholders that were going to be crucial to be part of each one of these conversations. And they were also tasked with the role of communicating, being that channel for the consultant and the town to communicate information about the project, to bring them into the different activities and to keep that conversation going. So the first step we took to understand the context in the community was to work with our consultant partner, Arnett Waldreau, and get a market analysis of the project area as well as the greater Bedford region. We needed to understand what was the demographic profile, what was the local, what was the demand for the local trade areas, whether that was the primary or the secondary trade areas, what was the opportunity in terms of residential growth, as well as what was the market segment that we were going to be dealing with? What are the population groups that form part of this community from the data standpoint? The next step was to align what the research had been telling us, what the data showed, with what the community really wanted. And that's when we really had to roll our sleeves and get in the community, work with them. This is where the steering committee was very key and crucial in their role as well, because the intersection between those community wants and needs and the market opportunity is where the magic happens. That's where the opportunity is going to present for different projects and initiatives. So in order to really understand the context of the community and get the community to communicate what the actual wants and needs were, we use a design thinking approach. And for those of you that are not familiar, design thinking is a process for creative problem solving. We use it a lot in the design field. It has a human-centered core, and it basically encourages organizations and communities to really focus on the people that they're creating for. So this leads to better programs, products, services, and just an overall holistic planning process. It's developing solutions in the service of people, not just assuming what the solutions are going to be, but what the people are actually needing. What are the identifying very clearly what the challenges are that matter to people, and to take a step even further, to engage the community to be part of the solution, because they're the ones that hold the key information of how the habits, the trends, and the mindsets of the people that live there. So there's a series of stages that we go with this process that help people really understand each other in the community, what their actual wants and needs are, and to paint a picture of the opportunities available based on the people's wants and needs. So we use a couple of resources I just wanted to mention real quick for our techniques that we use for different exercises. Luma Institute is one of them, and some of you might be familiar with Community Heart and Soul. That's another tool that we use often for these type of exercises. Particularly for Bedford, so what we did, we paired our research, we captured what our research showed regarding population groups in the community. That included teens and college students, young professionals, families, middle-aged professionals that had no kids but were very into their pets, empty nesters, as well as baby boomers. And this was a very challenging task because we had 100 people. But what we wanted to do was to ask all these community members to answer the questions that you're seeing on the screen as if they were one of these population groups. And so What we did is we invited everybody to meet us in the gymnasiums of the Susie G. Gibson School. And we had set up a number of tables around the room. And after the initial presentation that showed the community what were our finds, what we had been doing as part of the planning process, we invited everybody to gather at each one of these tables. So they were separated into different groups. And each table was giving a number of post-its as well as markers. And then we rolled out the questions on the screen and we said, okay, guys, we need you to answer these questions as if you were these different population groups. People were a little hesitant to start writing, but once the conversation started among them, the ideas and the responses just start flowing. People that had never talked to each other before start having conversations about opportunities and challenges and why is this an issue for a certain person, and how do we attract more young people to our community? How do we retain talent? So all those good conversations started happening as people answered the various questions that we had framed structure for them. We had a very diverse group of people, and we try to mix them as much as we can because we wanted to make sure that all the voices were going to be heard. The second part of the exercise asked each of the tables and the participants to look at the responses that they had come up with, and as a group, as a team, envision their downtown. So they were asked to write specific projects down, to write, to draw, to diagram, whatever they felt comfortable doing, but to encapsulate everybody's wants and needs into one concept. And then one person for each table was asked to present the overall idea from the group. And that became the foundation and the key to develop the projects as well as the vision for the project. So you see a couple of images here of how people presented their thoughts and ideas. So this allowed people that are not usually trained as designers to learn and use creative tools to address a vast of challenges and come together as a community, even though there were smaller groups, to come up with solutions. Our team then took all those what felt millions of post-its back and tried to discern what were the common themes, what were the commonalities, what were some of the topics that people felt very strongly about. And that's where we started the rest of the planning process to develop the actual plan. There were key topics that came up with which aligned somewhat with the stakeholder group. So we went back to the stakeholder group and they each gravitated to, again, these theme groups. The outcome of that meeting also became the foundation for the development of guiding planning principles. And we wanted to make sure that we were speaking very clearly for the community, not what we made assumptions for. So the vision statement was actually crafted at the community meeting. We were just helping the residents refine it, but that was a very important takeaway from that big meeting. The activities of the meeting also brought to light some specific land uses that the community wanted to see more of along the corridor and around the downtown area in Bedford. So we encapsulated, again, people's thoughts and ideas into a very diagrammatic way that put their thoughts into a visual tool that would help the conversation keep going. And that's when the public input started on the second round.
Josephine, could you go back to that one slide? I just want to point out right there. So all of those items on the right, so all those items on the right keyed out to the different concepts. Can you read a couple of what those were? I see we have red as the redevelopment opportunities, and that kind of ties us back to our EPA Brownfields grant.
Yeah, sure. So all the areas in red, because this kind of focused on opportunity sites based on perceived challenges related to brownfields, we want to make sure that we downsize to a manageable number of properties. So the ones in red presented a redevelopment opportunity based on previous uses. The yellow ones presented an opportunity for community gathering spaces based on other activities that happen around it, and because it was the center of the downtown area, to kind of just make it that center of activity. The blue was mid-density residential, where there was opportunity to increase opportunities for housing. The darker blue is the housing, but that encompass upper story housing, because downtown Centertown was going through some vacancy on the upper story levels of buildings, so that there was an opportunity to capture that market there. The orange was more small commercial and retail, and that happened just in a couple places where there was concentration of activity. Anything with the green, the light and dark, there was opportunities for either open spaces, recreational areas, or urban greening strategies. I think the purple one was, let's see, infill development. So how to put some underutilized sites to a better productive use.
Great, thank you. So this step is what we then took to the public. You mentioned this was kind of an iterative process where we took a blank slate to the public at the big community meeting, and then we took this concept on to our pop-up meetings. And these pop-up meetings, you can go on to the next one there, Josephine.
There we go.
Thank you. So we held these around town because I feel it was very important that we meet people where they are. It's tough, when you're in government, to think about, well, if people are interested, they're going to come to this, where we are at town hall or wherever it might be, but that's not the case. So and we really wanted to be sure that we were reaching a different demographic than ordinarily would, and because really people only come to town hall to pay their electric bill and their dog tags, so that's a very limited segment of our population. So we took this concept plan to a number of places. Bedford Farmers Market on a Saturday. The most fun one we had, I think, was taking it to the local grocery store, which is kind of at the epicenter of an area that really needs some redevelopment. I had a lot of comments in the public meeting about how that space needed to be better. We went to the middle school, and this was interesting because this was actually just a cop camp. So we were trying to capture people as they were dropping kids off or leaving, and then it spent some time at the library. And then Bowers Center and Goose Creek, this was really neat because they had their own spaces there, but there were champions and stakeholders that were there that could speak with the public at each of those locations. And then it went to the Welcome Center over a weekend because we get a lot of foot traffic through there coming into the community. And then lastly, it spent a week at the municipal building, pretty much close to my office, where people could drop in and talk to me about it. The big thing was getting the survey in the hands of people. It was online, but it was also in paper, because those 5 principles you saw on a previous slide, we needed to know how connected were people going to be to those, and then in order to draft up their preferred concepts that we were going to do, because we couldn't do it all. There were so many great ideas that came out, so we didn't really want to limit people, but we had to know what was going to be a highest priority for them. And so after this, we do still have the Facebook pages up. So you can see it there at the bottom, School to School Bedford. So that is still live. Yeah, take a look at it when you have a minute there. But we use those pop-up events to iteratively to find out what people wanted from that process.
I think also what was really neat about these pop-ups was that most of the people that were at the post of the pop-up were people from the steering committee. So they were able to explain what the ideas that came out from the larger community, and that's where the role of advocate really came into play. So this were the results from the survey that, as Mary mentioned, was live at the pop-up site as well as online. We wanted to make sure that we understood very clearly what was the highest priority for the community at large when we crafted the guiding principles. So the community spoke. They had their top 3 priorities as to what they wanted to do, focusing on local assets and positioning their downtown for economic growth, preserving their unique character was a very important one, as well as foster healthy and vibrant community. So all these was taken into consideration for the recommendations and the projects of the plan. We also asked in that survey for people to vote on their top 3 project ideas, because as Mary mentioned, there were so many ideas that came out from the meeting. You can imagine 100 people having their thoughts written down on paper. So there were so many ideas that came out that were really good. So the community voted as to what were the top 3. There were some other ones that we thought were very important as well, so we included in the part of the plan as recommendations. But we focused on 3 catalyst projects that we called, because we knew there were going to be agents for change in moving forward. So the word cloud kind of illustrates what was mentioned the most in terms of what was important for the community, and then the list on the right were the 3 top project ideas that included the Edmonds Street Park recreational area, which was a site of Susie G. Gibson School. It was a decommissioned school bus storage parking. The multi-use park and outdoor space. They wanted an area near downtown that was going to be a venue for community gatherings and events. And then an interactive playground and dog park. And that's going to be that they needed a place for the kids to play, as well as a place for pets. So the vision plan became more than just a plan. It became more of a toolkit that could help the steering committee continue their efforts forward, as well as the town of Bedford as a guide to help them navigate, what are some of the priorities, what we want to focus on next. So this is an illustrative plan of where the different catalyst projects would happen, as well as some of the other initiatives that we're going to mention here shortly. So you'll see at the south where the Susie G. Gibson School is, that is the recreational area. There's the gathering space right in the middle of the corridor, as well as the north end where we had proposed the playground and the dog park. And I'll give you some more details on that. All these ideas and feedback and input from the community helped us frame the components of the plan to make sure that we were focusing on what was very important for the community and what was going to help the community move forward and take the next step. So there were 5 main chapters that addressed the general topics. What were the challenges, the opportunities, the goals, and recommendations. We discussed specifically conceptual designs for the catalyst project, which would give the community a starting point to look for ways to leverage resources as well as capacity. And then a getting started chapter that talked about the implementation strategies and what were some of the steps the community could take moving forward to get this vision started. So the Edmonds Street Park, like I mentioned, it was envisioned as a recreational area. A lot of members remember that members of the community remember there was a community pool back in the day that wanted to see some of those activities back in that place. So we provided some conceptual designs as to how that southern part of Bridge Street could become an asset for the community.
And you can see Susie Gibson Pool in the background of that, so just beyond the bus garage that is going to be going.
Yeah, right there. That is
our anchor. Yeah, so that bus garage is going away, and we've actually used our EPA Brownfields grant to do a phase 1 and phase 2 to help the county transition out for that, just for anyone who'd want to know that.
Thank you, Mary. The second site that was the intersection of Bedford and Washington Street, there was a very underutilized parking lot near the grocery store Vista Food. We see an opportunity there for a gathering area, a public space that can serve as a venue for many of the events that the town would like to host. We included some of the activities in our conceptual design that the community felt was needed for all kinds of population groups. So here you can see a little bit of before and after. And this was also a good connecting point between the northern and the southern part of the Bridge Street, which the community felt was disconnected.
Yeah, we have a huge disconnect from that, where Main Street is 1 block north of this, and you can see East Washington Street there on the left. So people feel that once you cross that, it's in a different area. And we are trying to create a walkable community, particularly for this end of Bridge Street, to help people feel connected to downtown and bring them closer in. And this is also East Washington Street, 1 block to the left, has the farmers market. So this is a key area that people really focused on, where we felt the disconnect, and then how can we figure out how to improve that to further connect the community. That's why this plan is all about making connections through here.
Mm-hmm. The third one was the Depot Street Park. That's on the north side of Bridge Street, where there seems to be a culture of arts starting to grow. And we saw the opportunity for one of the brownfield sites to become an asset for the community, and really kind of encapsulate the theme of interactive play and arts and culture that as a community is growing so big. There's a restaurant on the other side of the tracks, and there's again an emphasis on making the whole area, the core of Bedford, more walkable. So this was one of the preferred projects as well, that created a venue as well for younger kids.
Yeah, that one has its own design challenges there with the border of the Norfolk Southern Railroad tracks. But we had a very strong showing for those people who wanted a dog park. So we definitely want to give a shout out. So then after we had these catalyst projects, it comes back to the town to actually make these things happen. So our marching orders, and this is not unfamiliar to the planners who are familiar with next steps. So standard matrix, but what this did is it followed those 5 key principles, and it took them across the projects. And then, so for example, we've got develop new and support existing entrepreneurial programs. That's pretty standard thing. So who do we connect with on that? Of course, Department of Housing and Community Development. And then trying to jump down, we go to create a market position, and then who are the players that need to be brought together in that in those endeavors. So we've got our marching orders, and the stakeholder committee does ask me on occasion, so where are we with these? And so then I lay out what we've done to date on whatever project it might be. But then a lot of that is I also try to work with them to put back on them what can be done by the community and should be done. So I expect they're going to be wanting to hear from me soon again about an update on where things are. Other parts of our implementation, we mentioned the connections and connectivity through the community. So we have one famous loop. It's a walking trail there at the north end around the middle school property. So then we heard from people that that's good. Can we do more? And so we developed a west loop and a south loop, west loop and east loop, excuse me. It actually started out being a north and a south loop, but then the more we talked to people, it made more sense to use Bridge Street down the center there to improve walkability and get people walking in front of the businesses. So it became a west and an east loop. And the way that we're implementing some of this, you can see on the left, we have signage now that are pulling those pieces together where they're not recognized as trails because there may not be a sidewalk, there may not be something there, but to let people know that they're on the right path for doing this. And the neat thing about this project is the logo was developed in a public meeting. On the left there, we had an artist attend who could actually draw because I can't. So we brought in someone who could handle something like that. And then you can see what it turned out looking like right there. And we did this with an AARP grant for the signage, and I'll show you some other things that came out of that grant. So those of you who may have seen this presentation at the July planning conference, you're going to now get to see some implementation even further than that. Well, we were just kicking off our AARP grant at the time there. And one of the components for connectivity and transportation that came out of the plan outcomes was to use a bus loop that we have currently serving people from the populations and apartments on the west end of town to bring them to Walmart and doctor's offices and other things on the east end. But then we talked about how can we improve downtown by bringing them to a place where they can't get to, bring them downtown to shop and eat. So we are going to be calling this the Otter Bus, we think. So the Friday loop hopefully is going to extend into a weekend loop that connects the D-Day property and everyone else downtown who ordinarily can't get downtown on their own. And also just give an update, we are still working towards an Amtrak Station, a stop in Bedford between Lynchburg and Roanoke. So we have to take into account where that might be, and again, improving the walkability and then connectivity to that site too. So that was in the mix in all of our planning and conversations we had about how to make that happen on the ground. Next one there. So we have some other implementation that we wanted to show too for public art. Oh, actually, back to transportation circulation, sorry. So continuing on with the conversation about the transportation circulation, Josephine can talk further about how we're doing that on the south end of Bridge Street. This is just in the block just above Vista Foods. So part of the conversation here was to actually close that street and make it usable either intermittently or permanently. So we're working on concepts that can make that happen, to where we can have outdoor seating or just green it up where we don't have any trees on Bridge Street. And our most recent conversation was using a Department of Forestry grant to bring together the property owners and the business owners along Bridge Street here. Josephine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay,
so yeah,
sorry.
So this was part of the urban greening strategy. We heard a lot from the community members that more trees were wanted and needed along the corridor, because that would foster walkability and then more pedestrian activity along the corridor that would support the businesses. So there were two initiatives that were proposed. One was the street tree program that Mary just mentioned, and then let me just back up. On this one, we had introduced the concept of parklets. Because the streets are very narrow along Bridge Street, it was very challenging to propose a solution to widen the sidewalks. So an alternative that we've seen in other communities that work very well as a temporary or long-term solution has been the implementation of parklets as to increase outdoor seating as well as outdoor retail. So that is something that the community felt very interested in, and that we have explored in other communities. And so it was part of the next steps in some of the implementations that could happen. And if that is something that economically has been would help activate the businesses and retail storefronts and along the corridor, there's the option to transform it into a shared commercial street where there's occasions or times where the pedestrians are given more priority than the cars, and that could happen during certain events of the year. So can we talk about this one? You want to talk about the public art, Mary?
Sure. Yeah, I'm still seeing the Bridge Street tree program there.
Let me see if I can go back. It should be public art.
Great. Yep, there we are. Now I can see. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other part of the implementation, we heard a lot about how to improve the not just connectivity, but the creating places that are more welcoming to the community, and a lot of conversations came out about how we can use public art to achieve that. So as part of that, we used the AARP grant to try and improve the benches. I don't have a before and after, but basically the benches that exist along the loop are concrete, and ones that may look like they belong, I wouldn't say at a cemetery, but they do kind of have that feeling, and people actually didn't even notice them. When I put out these pictures there, they were like, oh, there are benches on the loop. I'm like, well, yes, there are. So let's see what we can do to actually make them functional, a place that people would want to sit down and stay. So we used our grant to put out a design process for benches and bike racks, because one of the things we heard is people would bike to downtown, but there's no place to put their bike. We heard that through our bike walk plan, which was also being developed at the same time as this. So one of the local artists submitted a painting she had of the Peaks of Otter, because that's our touchstone here in town. Even though it's in the county, it is the backdrop for so much that happens in the town. So this is the artist on the bench, and her artwork is in the front. And then the bike racks, this one's a really neat one. A train came out of it, and then also another Peaks thing, but this was actually designed by a high school student in the county. So we're really proud of what's going to be coming out of our public art for people to appreciate on the loop and actually sit on them, we hope.
Mm-hmm.
And what we heard in the meetings as well was that what we needed to improve were vacancies, and so a lot of places have vacant storefronts. Well, we have those, our share of those, as does any town in the cycle of economic and business changes. But what we really wanted to promote was the use of the upper level living, where we have most of our vacancies were on the second story. So we wanted to have conversations about how best to do that. So we are now using, we have a building official who understands the historic tax code, not tax code, but not just historic tax credits, but the building code in historic buildings. And so I think we have pieces in place that are going to help people use the upper story, so that people will be living downtown, which means they'll be walking downtown and shopping and everything else, and creating a community that's more vibrant in our downtown area. Are we on to the next one?
So we're like, so the takeaways, are you seeing that one?
No, not yet. Mm-mm.
Okay, it's coming.
I've got a bad connection. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, great. Yep, I see that.
So some of the takeaways, go ahead, Mary, if you.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that we learned through this is our local newspaper. Is kind of funny to see this, but I wanted to point out that we got kudos for this as far as what we did right in this plan. And I liked his inset box about plans will go nowhere if the public isn't behind them. And that is, the key part of this wasn't a town plan. This was a community plan that the town was able to help with.
So some of the other takeaways that we found, to kind of just wrap it up as part of the planning process, is that it was very important for us to take advantage of the energy and the momentum that was already developed from a grassroots effort, but at the same time making sure that we really understand and know the context of the community, as well as engage the residents and the stakeholders that were being part of this process, to make them be the solution for the challenges that were identified and the ideas that wanted to be implemented in the community. Sometimes that meant reframing the question. So as a consultant, that was more of our key role, was to make sure that we guided the steering committee to structure their vision and reframe the challenges, sometimes to ask it in a different way, so that it could, all the perspectives of all the population groups could be taken into account, and look at the bigger picture of the opportunities that the community brought to itself through its, efforts, previous efforts, future opportunities for redevelopment, as well as available resources. So I think one of the important aspects of this project was that the bottom-up approach that made it so successful, and through a human-centered approach of the planning process, we're able to not only get a better understanding of what was really happening on the north and south side of Bridge Street, but also increase the capacity and the skill set of the community to organize itself to move and take things to the next level. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Mary.
Yep, that about summed it up.
Okay, so do we have any questions?
We do have some questions. So what I'll do is I will just run down the questions as they came in. So the first one is, how could the human-centered redesign of the parking lot around Vista Foods be applied to other grocery stores with large parking lots in a small to medium-sized town?
Well, one of the things about the human-centered design piece is that it is not a one model fits all communities. The thought behind the concept is that it provides you certain creative tools to invite the community to be part of the process. So the design thinking approach might look different in other communities. I think where the similarity is that it provides the basic foundation or the structure to understand who the stakeholders are for a potential, other project, and understanding how they can come up with the ideas themselves using these creative tools. So while some communities might have a little bit more understanding of, how a planning process works, some others might not. So you have to take it a couple steps back with the design, with the tools that design thinking offers. But the big picture concept is all the same. It's making sure that the people that are going to be using whether it's a site or a community, whatever scale the project is, that those are the people that are being part of the solution and coming up with the ideas, because they will know how they will be using the space.
All right. The next question we have is, the downtown has really beautiful architecture at pedestrian scale. The one thing lacking is shade. Have you thought about how to make the downtown more attractive to visitors?
Absolutely. So this is where we were talking about getting the Department of Forestry grant to help us do a tree planning exercise. So we had actually Hill Studio came back and we met with the property owners and business owners in the area to find out what their high priorities were. And of course, we heard a lot of people say don't lose parking, but then we also had others say lose parking and here's what you can do with it. So they were stepped through a process about what type of on-street greening could be done in lieu of tearing up the infrastructure we put in, where we have underground utilities for the lights. So that's where the parklet concept came in that you saw there at the end with the seating area. We'll probably be talking about what spaces can we give up. I mean, of the loading spaces or the police parking, what can be done. And so some of you may have heard about Parking Day, where you can kind of use a space in a green way. So anyway, Department of Forestry can help you with that, but we're definitely trying to figure out how to do that and do it well.
Great. The pop-up cafes and green spaces look great. How would you create wayfinding for the trail system?
Yeah, so we had the pictures that showed what color people are going to be, what color trail they're going to be on of the three. So we color coded them. We've also developed a map that's in the downtown kiosk, Centertown, working on a QR code where people could kind of see where they are within that trail system, but basically color coding with that signage.
Great. And just a reminder, if you all have questions, please type them in the question box, because we definitely have some time to answer some more as we go through these. Great engagement plan. How involved were various staff departments and which one in developing the plan and engaging with the community?
So we had our public works was there. Our assistant town manager were present at the big meeting that we had. They're aware of the projects. They didn't have a specific assigned role in the participation of it, but they're aware of them. And then, so we kind of did some ground truthing with them about finding out how something may or may not work ultimately. But until we have a final plan for each of the concepts, it was kind of hard to say what the involvement will be. Of course, it's mostly going to be our public works. And then we also own our own electric department here at the town. So we have to continue having those conversations, not just with the public, but with ourselves to find out how it can be implemented best.
All right. The next question is, if space is an issue for trees, would you consider shade sails or awnings?
We do. We have at the Centertown Park, which is at the intersection of Bridge and Main, we do have umbrellas there for people to put out. Awnings, we do have a grant program where we will give people back up to $3,000 for adding awnings to their building and other things that they do for facade improvements. So definitely, any way we can get shade, we want to.
Great. The next question is, inspiring graphics and project ideas. Once the list of projects was developed, did you find more public support for parks, dining, shows, etc., things that cost money, as opposed to redevelopment, things that generate new revenue?
I would say it does tend towards more of the cost side, but I think what we're hoping is going to come out of this is that there's going to be an entrepreneur out there or someone else who seizes on the idea and says, hey, here's an opportunity for me to do this in conjunction with the town, the county, the community for how to do that. So that would help us on the revenue side. The town doesn't sponsor or do events here, so we rely heavily on heavily on entrepreneurs to step up and do that, and we will enable them in any way that we can.
Great. It looks like a great place to visit. Do you have any events planned for spring or summer?
Again, we rely on our businesses to do that. So our artisan community is huge, and that's part of what our implementation strategy was to do, was to enable that economy to grow in any way that we can and get out of the way. That's sometimes the best thing that government can do. So we offer incentives. And then we also have Centerfest is our big event held, I think, the third Saturday of every September. So that's huge. D-Day has its own events too. So the biggest challenge we found in talking with people is that there's no central calendar for where all the events are. So we rely on the County Tourism and Welcome Center to put those out, because it's a lot like cat wrangling. There's just so much going on in the area that we don't want everyone to feel like they're an island, but it's really tough to find a central point where people can go, oh yeah, you go here to get this information. So.
All right, great. That is our last question at this point. If anybody has any more questions, I encourage you to submit them to the question box. Again, as we give people a few minutes, if there are any more questions, it's a reminder that this webinar is recorded and you can find it online at APA Virginia's YouTube page, along with APA Virginia's website that lists all of the upcoming webinars each month and ways to submit ideas for new speakers and new presentation topics as interested by our membership. Mary and Josephine, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'll take this time to thank you guys for presenting. And then we did get one question. Great planning. Can you share the presentation PowerPoint with us? Mary and Josephine, if you all are comfortable with that, we have ways to get that out. I know that you shared that it's a rather large file, but we'll figure out a best way to share information with attendees, as we have with all of our other presentations. Everybody who joined us today will get a follow-up email with all follow-up information and the link to the posted webinar. And again, Mary and Josephine, thank you so much for taking the time to present with us. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month for our webinar on February 24th at noon. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.